Have you ever wondered if Bitcoin is really undervalued? Sure, prices fluctuate, but what if there was a way to gauge Bitcoin's true worth based on its network fundamentals? In this video, I'm going to look at Bitcoin's hash adjusted price, an interesting metric that looks at mining power to reveal when Bitcoin might actually be undervalued. First, a disclaimer is in order. This is not financial advice. I'm not a finance professional. This is purely for entertainment and educational purposes only. Thinking about different ways to value Bitcoin is something I find very interesting. A lot of people in the traditional finance space still think Bitcoin is worthless because it doesn't conform to how they typically think of investment assets, right? Bitcoin is quite different. Bitcoin doesn't have cash flows or anything like that. And that's right. Bitcoin is a technology, it's a protocol, and therefore any attempt to value it should take that into account. So, one thing I think is very valuable is to look at Bitcoin's network fundamentals and use that as a guide when thinking about Bitcoin's value in the short term and the long term. So I mentioned Bitcoin's network fundamentals. What does that really mean? It means the strength of the network that underlies the Bitcoin protocol, the technology itself. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at this chart. Here we can see the Bitcoin hash rate in blue and the Bitcoin price in orange. So first of all, what is the hash rate? Quick refresher, Bitcoin miners essentially gather up transactions into blocks. Then they compute a hash for that block that has to satisfy certain constraints. And it's a very computationally intensive thing to do. But once they find that hash, they submit that block, they broadcast it to the nodes, and the nodes will check it and accept it, and it'll be added to the blockchain, and those transactions are then confirmed. So the hash rate essentially shows, how much computing power is being expended on the network to do this. And it's a very important metric because it's also related to Bitcoin's security. So Bitcoin is this massive decentralized computing network. And if you wanted to commandeer the network, if you wanted to corrupt the network, you would need to control more than half of the hash power on the network to do that. And that's an extremely tall order, right? Like, that's a very difficult thing to do when you consider how much power and computational energy is expended in the hashing and the mining process. So when we see the hash rate increasing like we do on this chart, in fact, increasing exponentially, that's a great thing, right? It means the network is getting more robust, more secure. And that's exactly what we would want to see. But there's something else interesting here that you might have noticed. And that's the fact here that, well, the price tends to sort of mirror the hash rate. The two tend to sort of increase together. There's been periods in the past where Bitcoin's price has run up massively and the hash rate hasn't really followed it, right? So this happened in 2018. We had a price run up here to like 17K. And the hash rate just kind of continued following its regular kind of growth curve. And then in 2021, we had a huge run up and a high of around 66K. But the hash rate again didn't really follow that. In fact, we had a hash rate of just 162 exahash. I say just, that's that's a lot. But when you compare it to today, right? I mean, if we look at today, we can see the hash rate is up to 713 exahash. And the interesting thing is that the price is not that much different from the 2021 high, right? We have a price of like 67,000. So essentially what this is telling us is that the network can, at current hash rates, it can support a much higher Bitcoin price if we look at previous highs. So with that said, let's do a couple of calculations here. What we can do is actually calculate a hash adjusted price and kind of see what Bitcoin could be worth today at current hash rates. So what I've done is I've taken the Bitcoin price at the previous 2021 high and today. I've just divided it by 1,000 to make the math a bit easier. And then I've taken the hash rate here in exahash, and I've computed a ratio, a hash to price ratio. So you can see here in 2021, the ratio is 2.5. Today, the ratio is 10.6. So what we can do is we can divide the current hash rate by this previous ratio of 2.5 to compute a hash adjusted price for Bitcoin today. So when we do that, we get a hash adjusted price of $290,000 for today. So, but the real price, right, is only 67K. So essentially, what this is telling us is that according to the hash rate, one of these network fundamental metrics, Bitcoin is severely undervalued. And in fact, at current hash rates, we could support a much higher price for Bitcoin. Okay, so I hope you found this interesting. This is a relatively quick video, but I think it's just very important to look at Bitcoin as a technology and therefore look at its network fundamentals when trying to understand its value. So hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.